Greetings, citizens. Hey you beautiful creepy human being you. Welcome to today's true crime episode. I'm so happy that you are here. I'm so happy that somehow in all of this that we're forced to deal with on the day today, you and I were able to find each other on this crazy little planet that we call home. My name is Brittany or Bratterstein, whichever you prefer, and today we're going to be discussing the murder of 24-year-old Lori Slesinski at the hands of her friend, Rick Ennis. Rick Ennis, a man who already had a history, a record for committing 2 murders when he was 12 years old, okay? He was released when he was 21 and went on to befriend Lori. But before we get started, if you have not yet had the pleasure, please make sure to join the Brat Pack by subscribing and ringing the bell. I put out a new video every single week, sometimes 2 a week, and I would love to hang out with you. Yes, you, specifically you, but I can only do that if you join the Brat Pack and become one of us. Now, before we get into the details of today's case, I first need to say a big thank you to the sponsor of today's video, and that is Aura. Sponsors like Aura make it possible for me to put out videos as consistently as I do, and I want to start this off with a question for you. And that question is this: have you ever Googled yourself or somebody you love, somebody you know, and found a lot of personal information on one of those public listing sites? Because when I tell you, it is far more common for your personal information to get leaked out on the internet than you may think. Because a lot of you probably know, I used to be a paralegal. I was a paralegal for almost 10 years, and we'd have to serve people papers, and you can find so much information on people online, and that is because there are these things, these creatures out there. Well, they're not creatures. They're data brokers, okay? And they make money selling your personal information to people that you don't want to have it, like spammers and robocallers. They can even find out where you live, where you put your head down at night. I am not down with that sickness. I value my privacy, and I value your privacy, and that's why I want to introduce you to Aura. Now, I have some good news and I have some bad news. The good news: data brokers are legally required to take down your information if you ask them to. Bad news: they make it basically impossible for that to happen, because first, you have to figure out which of those pesky data brokers have your information, and that's next to impossible, but that's where Aura comes in. Aura identifies which of the data brokers have your information, and they submit opt-out requests on your behalf. They do the work so that you do not have to. The very first thing I did when I signed up for Aura is I went to the data broker opt-out section, because I was just curious how many could really have my information, and it turned out 30. Like 30, and Aura had already submitted opt-out requests on my behalf. Thank you, Aura. They also do things like see if your information has been leaked on the dark web. And nobody wants their information leaked on the dark web. If you know, you know. And they check and see if things like your passwords for, I don't know, your banking are secure. And it turns out mine are, which I'm happy to learn, because I wasn't sure. You know, I've been using the same password for over a decade, and it turns out I got it right the first time. I don't know. And those are just a couple of examples of things that Aura does to keep you safe online from threats that you just simply cannot see. Through just the Aura app, which is super easy to set up, by the way, you can get things like parental controls, which I'm going to be needing sooner and sooner. Hopefully not too soon, but I mean, he is almost 2. Antivirus, VPN, password management, identity theft insurance, and more. And you get it all in one place. No need for several different apps for all of these services, and you get it all at one affordable price. Now, it sounds like a great deal to me, but I'm not your mom. I can't tell you what to do, but what I can tell you is I don't want people to exploit and profit off of your personal information, and you don't have to let that happen. You can let Aura help you by keeping you safe online. And of course, I have some good news for you today. Aura is offering members of the Brat Pack the opportunity to peruse, to experience all they have to offer for free for 2 weeks through my link. So if all of that sounds as good to you as it does to me, make sure to go to my link in the description box. It's aura.com/Bratterstein to get a 14-day free trial and see if any of your personal information has been leaked online, and if it has, let Aura help you put a stop to it today. Now, I just want to say a big thank you to Aura for sponsoring this video, for sponsoring my channel for the extended amount of time they have, because truly, it's sponsors like Aura that make it possible for me to put out videos as consistently as I do. And a big thank you to you guys for always being so supportive of all of my sponsors. You rock. Don't ever change. Now, let's go ahead and get into this video. So this video is on a case that if you were here last week, you know was new to me, but has since become very, very not new to me. I'm familiar with the case now because I did such a deep dive on it that it required 2 parts. Which, if you do not know, if you've just stumbled upon this video, this is video 2 of a 2-part series. There's not going to be any more, it's just 2 videos. But if you haven't seen the first one, you may want to, because we went over a lot. We went over a lot about the case, the investigation. We went over who Lori was as a person. We went over what was found at her home. We went over what was found at the scene of her burned car. We went over the suspect, the main suspect who ended up getting arrested And we went over his prior murders from when he killed his parents when he was 12 years old. Went over the beginning of the cold case investigation. We went over a lot, and you may just want to learn about it because it's very interesting. But there is still more to tell. So today I'm going to tell you the entire story. I read all the things so that you do not have to. And at the end of this video, I'm going to ask you a question of the day. I'm going to give it to you now so you can have it kicking around in your brain as we go through the details of this case. But of course, I want you to answer once you have something to go on. But the question of the day is this. Well, actually, I have a couple. One, what do you believe happened to Lori that day in her trailer? Or do you think that perhaps it could have happened somewhere else, though I don't think anybody will actually think that? Two, do you think Rick was responsible, or do you think it's more possible that investigators got tunnel vision and just went too hard on the wrong guy? Let me know all your thoughts in the comments below after we go through the details of this case. Now, with all of that said, come gather around and let me tell you the remainder of the story of the murder of 24-year-old Lori Slesinski. So I'm going to start this with the simplest refresher of what we covered last week and where we left off last week for two reasons. One, in case you didn't watch video one, in which case, if that is the case, how dare you? And two, in case you just want a little refresher because, there has been a week in between videos. The setting is Auburn, Alabama, a college town with lots of young folk running around doing young folk thing, and one of these young folk was 24-year-old Lori Slesinski. On June 10th, 2006, Lori had plans to meet up with a friend of hers. It was her best friend, Lindsay. They were going to have a night of fun, a girls' night, drinks, chillin', not killin', having a good time indoors, but Lori never showed up. When Lindsay wasn't able to get a hold of Lori all weekend, and then she didn't show up for work on Monday or Tuesday because Lindsay and Lori worked together, alarm bells started going off and people started going into search mode, right? Her mom reported her missing. Her friends went over and searched her trailer, and when they got there, when police got there, they noticed a couple things that were weird, like the sign of a struggle, scuff marks along the hallway, a disheveled bed, a missing phone cord. There were also missing rugs from the kitchen and a missing trash can. Now, initially her case was being treated as a missing persons case, with officers thinking it was very possible that she would return. But just the day after the missing persons report was filed, their opinion on the case changed because Lori's car was found set on fire not far from her home. Almost immediately, police had somebody in mind that they thought may be responsible for Lori's disappearance, and this was a good friend of hers and the last person who had seen her the day that she went missing, and this was Rick Ennis, a man who was obsessed with Lori, who was in love with her, who told anyone who would listen how much he loved her, a man who just days before she went missing had went into her home when she was not there and left her a love note that really upset her. She was planning to have a conversation with Rick about this, and now she was missing. When Rick was questioned, Rick gave, quote, suspicious and conflicting statements, which led police on a wild goose chase looking for Lori. And when he was questioned, he had scratch marks on his arms and hands that looked like they'd been there for a few days, and at the time, Lori had been missing for a few days. Unfortunately, though, even though police really believed that Rick was responsible, especially considering literally within a week, I believe it was within a week of being questioned, Rick had moved. He fled the area of Auburn, never to return. They did not feel like they had enough evidence to arrest Rick, and they didn't even feel like they had enough evidence to prove to a jury and get a conviction on a murder case because they didn't even think they could prove that she had been killed because they didn't have a body. So the case went cold, and it stayed cold for 10 years until a cold case team took over the case and started giving it a second look. In doing so, the cold case team found that the original investigators had been so close, but had just missed a few key things. So now, with new evidence like DNA and witness statements, they felt like they had enough to arrest and prosecute Rick Ennis for the murder of Lori Slesinski, all without a body. You know what? I feel like that was pretty concise. I feel like I did that little roundup pretty well, but I will say you should still watch the first video if you haven't, so that you can get to know Lori as a person better and know her as more than her murder, and also to hear all the details of what Rick did to his parents. But if whatever, let us continue. So investigators had completely combed through the case file on Lori's disappearance and eventually found what they considered to be critical evidence that had been overlooked during the previous investigation, and they now felt like it was enough to concretely link Rick Ennis to the disappearance of Lori, or murder rather, because so much time had gone by the time we got to this point, that they believed that Lori was no longer alive. This evidence included a partial rolled cigarette that had been found at the burn site of Lori's car back in 2006. A hand-rolled cigarette that they had all this time that had never been tested for DNA, despite the fact that it was a hand-rolled cigarette, so you would think there could be DNA on it, either from being smoked and you put it into your mouth, or the fact that somebody probably licked it while rolling it, so there was likely saliva all over this bitch. The cigarette was tested, and it was a positive match for Rick Ennis. And that wasn't all they had. They had more DNA. They had DNA that was blood or could have been blood. Apparently it could also maybe have been considered to be skin cells. They couldn't say for sure, though oftentimes in the court they do call it blood, but it was said that it could not be blood. But it was found on the door handle of Lori's trailer, and that matched to Rick Ennis. And there was semen in her bed sheets that matched to Rick Ennis. And everything was a match to Rick Ennis. And it's so frustrating because if you watched part one, you know that they had all this evidence all this time, and it was just sitting there untouched for like ever. And it's just so irritating because it feels like maybe we could have gotten him arrested sooner. But here we find ourselves. So, in August of 2018, the then DA of Lee County, his name was Brandon Hughes, he made a statement, an announcement, gave a press conference, whatever, saying that, Rick Ennis had been indicted for the murder of Lori Slesinski, and noted that finding Rick Ennis had not been an easy task because Rick Ennis was the type of person who did not want to be found. According to the DA, in doing their investigation to try to find him, they discovered that Rick Ennis was the type of person who moved around a lot and was the type of person who always had somebody else pay his bills, so there was no paper trail. Apparently, he was very proficient at flying under the radar. So when police first started to look for him, the very first place they went, or at least the first place it's reported that they went, was South Carolina, because they had received a tip that Rick was living there with a wife. Him and that wife have since been divorced, but they got a tip that he was there. And so they mobbed over. It was reported that within 30 minutes of finding out that he may be in South Carolina, all these officers, like 100 of them, got together. They briefed. They got their little plane tickets, and they rocked and they rolled right on over to South Carolina. Unfortunately, though, they get there, they look around, and they come to the conclusion that he is no longer in South Carolina, but they get another tip that he has now relocated to Virginia. So they head to Virginia, and let me tell you, in case you're not local or you're not too familiar with where the states are, Virginia and South Dakota, it's not South Dakota, it's South Carolina. My brain keeps wanting to say Dakota. I don't know why. Let's just say they're not exactly close, so I can only imagine the travel expense. But anyway, they get there. And yes, bitch, Rick Ennis is there. So, on his birthday, 100 officers raided the home he was in, which was located at the 4800 block of Fishers View Road in rural Pilot, Virginia. And when I say rural, I mean rural. I looked at an aerial map, and maybe it's just coming from the perspective of me, who is a Los Angelesonian, but the space, I cannot even imagine all that open space. But either way, that's where he was, and he was taken into custody. You know what, I just looked at a map because I was like, I've been getting South Dakota and South Carolina confused. Turns out South Carolina is a lot closer to Virginia than I thought it was. But either way, I guess they really raided this guy. There were 100 officers, as I said, and they were hiding behind bushes, behind cars, and they totally took him by surprise. And not just him and his fiance, because by this time he was engaged to a school librarian. And for reference, at this time he was working building teepees or yurts, as they're often called. This fool was engaged and had been previously married. That's a lot to do in, 10 years, but, or 12 years, I guess, 2018, 12 years. That's a lot to do in that time, but this fool was engaged. So I guess he and his fiancée, Elena, met, and she immediately liked him. She said he was friendly and open and funny, and said that he is one of the most compassionate, generous, and kind people that she's ever known. She says that she fell in love with his brain first and that he was super smart. And dude, she still feels that way about him. Or at least she did at the time he went to trial. She supported him all throughout the trial, saying that there was no way he was guilty, that if anything, Rick would have given his life to save Lori because that's the type of person he was. And she said all this despite knowing his history and knowing that he had killed his parents when he was a child. And I guess initially he didn't actually tell her himself. So she found out because 2 weeks into dating, she decided she wanted to kind of look up his family tree because she was an amateur genealogist, is how it's been reported. And when doing so, she found that he had committed these 2 murders. And when I say that out loud, because when I was, researching it and reading it, it didn't hit quite the same way as it does now that I'm saying it out loud. I guess it's fair that after just 2 weeks of dating, he wasn't like, oh, by the way, here's my history. But I can't even imagine dating somebody for 2 weeks and then finding that out. Dating sounds like a fucking nightmare. Anyways, apparently they sat down. He told her what happened. He told her why it happened, which he says he had told her, and by this time he had switched his story to the reason that he killed his mother was not that he didn't want to move. It was that she had been abusing him the way he, in a terrible way, and that the reason he never told police this, and so it wasn't reported that way, because she's like, well, that's not what you said back then, was because he was deeply ashamed of what happened and he didn't want anybody to know about it. Anyways, Rick was arrested and he was being held in jail in Virginia without bond while they worked on getting him extradited back to Lee County, Alabama. And initially he was going to have an extradition hearing. There was like a date set, but before the hearing actually happened, Rick decided to waive his extradition hearing. And so he was sent back to Lee County, where he was again held there without bond. And the prosecution was going after the death penalty. The Auburn police chief said of Rick's arrest, quote, "Today is about Lori, her family, friends, and helping them know what happened to her 12 years ago. That has always been the goal and has remained our goal for the past 12 years." Now, once Rick was arrested, that cold case team, man, they were ecstatic with their victory, especially, again, Whitaker, or at least Whitaker was the one who spoke out the most about his experience with this, because he said being able to call Lori's mother, Arlene, and give her this information was like the highlight of his career, though it was like a very sad call, because this poor woman had just been through so much, and yeah, it is really good news to finally get an arrest, but then at the same time, you have to know that that means that Lori's gone, because for all this time she'd been holding out hope, a part of her, that Lori may be out there, but now to know he's arrested and charged with her murder, that just kind of kills that little bit of hope that she had that Lori may come home one day, and that's just gone now. I just can't imagine what all of this was like for her family, for her parents. I saw an interview that her mom did, and it was, I believe, 6 years after Lori had gone missing, and even at that point she was still saying that she hoped Lori was alive out there, but that she just didn't believe that Lori would have left on her own. She said that she never believed that Lori just was not the type, that she wouldn't have left, that she loved her family, she loved her friends, and if there had been anything going on in her life that was so serious that it would make her want to run away, she would have told them, and even so, she never would have left Peanut. And she also said at that time that she was confused. She was confused because if somebody had done this to her and she had been murdered, it didn't make any sense to her because she had no enemies. She was such a loved person. So she said she held out hope, and that as a parent, you always had to have hope. But now, after all these years of hoping and suffering, she's getting the call that Rick Ennis has been arrested. Oh God, dude, and you know what? Speaking of everything this poor woman has been through, oh my God, I just feel so bad for her, because after Rick was arrested, shortly after Rick was arrested, her other child, Lori's older brother Paul, at 41 years old, died from cancer and a stroke. And not just Arlene, because I mention Arlene a lot because she did a lot of interviews and also because she goes through even more trauma later, but her husband Casey also, he had lost both of his kids, and I'm just happy that they were both still alive to see him be arrested, because we do sometimes see this in cold cases where, family members pass on before they're able to see justice served, and that does sort of happen in this case, but that's something we'll get into a little bit later. But after Rick Ennis was arrested, Lori's father Casey did make a statement where he said, quote, "This arrest will bring justice to our daughter, Lori." Now, Rick was arrested in 2018, but it would take 3.5 years before this case would finally go to trial, which is unfortunately pretty common. We see this all the time where cases just take forever to get going, but there were just like a lot of delays and a lot of like rescheduling of hearings because it was a death penalty case, and then there was COVID protocols because I believe one of his hearings was set to take place in February of 2020, and don't we know, ain't nothing was happening in February of 2020. Or was it in March? Was it in March of 2020 that things stopped happening? Truly, it is all a blur now. Oh, and during the time of all the delays, his attorney did file a motion to just try to get the whole case thrown out because he's like, this case is bullshit. But that was not successful, and he ended up having Rick undergo like a psychological evaluation to see if he was even fit to stand trial. And guess what? Shyamalan twist, he was. So finally, in March of 2022, so just 2 years ago now, the case went to trial. Now, what's so sad, and something that I alluded to a couple of minutes ago now, is that Lori's father, Casey, never got to see this case go to trial because in 2020, he got COVID and he ended up dying from COVID. And Arlene, man, to lose Lori, to find out Rick was going to be arrested, then to have her son die, and then to get the call that she needs to hurry over and see her husband because he's not doing well. She got there and he was gone. So she had to go through this whole situation, this whole trial alone. She had to sit there and hear the prosecution say that her daughter was dead and to lay out all the evidence that proved that. In the opening statement, the prosecutor said of Lori, and I quote, "Lori is not missing. Lori is dead. And not just dead, she's murdered." Now they did this, they had to be so blunt because they had to prove that without a body, Lori was actually dead. And the prosecution told the court, like, since that day in 2006, there has been no sign of Lori. Nothing. She's made no contact with her family, with her friends. There's been no birthday cards, no Mother's Day cards, no calls, not even a call when her brother died or her father died. There had been no reports of passports, driver's licenses, no credit history, nothing for Lori since that day. And it's not like she had any way to get anywhere because her only mode of transportation, her car, was left burned up at the end of a dead-end road, and she had no reason to leave anyway. She had future plans, a family who loved her, a dog she loved, a dog that the prosecutor reminded the jury was Lori's world, and the two were inseparable. Which I feel like some people who aren't animal people are going to be like, a dog, like it's a dog. But like if you're an animal person, your dog is your dog. And speaking of this dog, for the animal lovers who may be wondering about Peanut's well-being after Lori disappeared, well, Lori's mom, Arlene, ended up adopting Peanut, so he lived with her. And she found comfort in having this like little piece of her daughter with her. And Peanut lived with her and her family until he was 16 years old. And then, dogs. He sadly died because dogs don't live that long, which is fucked up, but it's true. And what's super sweet here is Arlene said that Peanut never forgot Lori, which is heart-wrenching. She said that anytime Lori's name was mentioned, if Peanut was within earshot, no matter what he was doing, no matter where he was, he would run over and come into the room like, where is she? And she was just kind of in awe and amazed that this little dog never forgot his mama. And another thing that's super sweet, to keep going on this like mid-video dog happy note, is that prior to Peanut, Arlene wasn't like a big dog person, but Peanut had really like changed her position and changed her perception on what it was like to love a dog. So after Peanut passed, she adopted a new dog named Daisy. And she said that she knew that Peanut being able to change her into a dog lover would have made Lori smile. But I have digressed. So back to the trial and back to the opening statement. The prosecution said, no one knows what happened to Lori. No one knows where she is except for one person. And then they said, quote, "The only person who can tell us where she is also the last person to have seen her alive. And that's him." Referring to Rick, obviously. The prosecution said that Rick had killed Lori because he was romantically obsessed with her and that she had refused to be more than just friends. Rick himself had said that he wanted to be more than friends with Lori, and that her not wanting to be more than friends was tough because he had, quote, deep feelings for her. They pointed out that shortly before Lori was killed, Rick had written her a love letter and left it in her apartment, and that this had really upset her. And they implied that this was the reason that Lori had asked Rick to return her house key. Because if you remember from last week, Rick had a key to Lori's home, and the prosecution was saying, or rather, let me back up. Rick said that he had left the letter and the key at the same time, that Lori had asked him to return the key, and it wasn't related at all to his feelings for her or the letter, so he left the key and the letter at the same time. But the prosecution said that they believe that Rick had used the key, went into the house, left the letter, and that this upset Lori, and she felt like it was a violation of trust, so that's why she had asked him to give back the key, and that this had really upset him. They noted at court, the prosecution, that Rick was the last person to have seen Lori alive, and that when he was questioned just days after she went missing, he had scratch marks all over his arms and all over his hands that looked to be a few days old, and that Lori had been missing a few days. They also noted that when they searched Rick's car, they found what they believed to be a murder toolkit that included cleaning supplies, fuzzy handcuffs, and a knife. So the prosecution had some key pieces of evidence that they presented at trial that they said proved conclusively that Rick Ennis had murdered Lori Slesinski, and had witnesses who were able to place these key pieces of evidence with Rick in the years following her disappearance. And they had somebody who was a key witness who testified that Rick had confessed to him when the two had been friends, confessed to Lori's murder. For example, when it comes to the evidence, they had at least 2 witnesses who said they knew that Rick would often roll his own cigarettes, because remember, a hand-rolled cigarette with his DNA was found at the burn site. They also had someone who linked him to the gas can found at the burn site, the missing rugs from Lori's mobile home, the Galileo glass thermometer that Arlene had gotten Lori for Christmas, which was missing from her trailer, all that. They had people who said he had all those things. So with that, let's start with the gas can, and then I think we'll go into the rugs and the thermometer, and then end with the confession. So the gas can. The prosecution brought up a man named Jeremy as a witness, and Jeremy had worked with Rick at a bowling alley, which incidentally was very close to where Lori's car was found burned up back in 2006. Jeremy testified that on June 9th, 2006, he had been at home, he was cooking himself dinner when his phone rang. He says he answers the phone, and Rick Ennis was on the other line, and he said that this was unusual because Rick had never called him at his home before. But he says that Rick called him to say that he had run out of gas and asked if Jeremy could bring him some. Now, he says that he didn't want to. He wanted to be like, actually, I'm just going to eat dinner and stay home, but also was a person in need, so he decided he would go after he finished eating his dinner. So he finished cooking, finished eating, then went to the bowling alley where the two had worked, grabbed one of the, I believe there were 3 gas cans from there, went to the gas station, filled it up with gas, and then met Rick at a local church where he supposedly had run out of gas. He said that when he got to the church, he pulled up next to Rick, and in hindsight, when he looks back at that situation, he thought it was weird because Rick was backed into a parking spot, and you would just think that if a person's running out of gas, they might not bother to put in that much effort, but I also know that some people just always like to back into parking spots, so maybe it wasn't weird, but he was thinking in hindsight that it was. But he said he doesn't. He says he parked next to Rick's backed-in car. He rolled down his window, Rick got out and walked up to his car. And he said the next thing that stood out to him that was strange is that Rick asked him if Jeremy wouldn't mind getting out of his car and putting gas into Rick's car for him. And Jeremy was like, no, I'm not your gas bitch, direct quote. But no, he didn't say that. He said, no, how about you do it yourself? Because why would I ever do that for you? So Rick does. He puts the gas in his own car, and then he asks Jeremy if Jeremy wouldn't mind letting him keep the gas can. And he's like, no, I have to return it. I took that from work. But anyways, he says Rick put the gas in his car, and then afterwards he started up his car, and it started up right away. And he found this to be odd too, because he was a person who worked on cars, and he knew that generally if a car had been running out of gas and you added gas to it, it would take a little bit for the gas to get through the lines and start up the car, but it started up right away. But he didn't really think much of it at the time because he just wanted to get home. He didn't want to be in this situation in the first place, so he took the gas can and he returned it to the bowling alley, and then he went home. He said from there, he really didn't think about this interaction again until he was sitting down with the police being questioned about Lori's disappearance and her burnt up car. He said around the time he was questioned, he realized that one of the gas cans that had been there after he returned from that interaction with Rick was now missing. They were missing a gas can. And when he was shown a photo of the gas can that was found at the burn site of Lori's car, he said that he believed that was the gas can from the bowling alley. Now the defense attacked this and was like, listen, there are a zillion gas cans in the world. How can you look at a photo of this gas can and just know that it's the one from the bowling alley? And Jeremy responded saying, quote, "It was the same size, same color, same shape, same top. It physically matched the one that was missing from the fire cabinet. Again, it resembles 100% the can that was in the fire cabinet that was missing." He also testified that after he was questioned by police, Rick reached out to him and called him worried, saying that he believed the police were treating him as a prime suspect. And he said during this conversation, Rick also seemed a little frantic and wanted to know if Jeremy wanted to buy anything from him, wanted to buy any DVDs, his motorcycle. And he said he felt like Rick was trying to liquidate his assets and get quick cash so that he could like dip. But that was, of course, just his speculation on the situation. And I'm curious about your thoughts on this. Like, it could be a coincidence, right? I don't know a lot about gas cans, and I don't know if they are that distinct that you would be able to be like, yep, that's the gas can from the bowling alley. So if you know anything about that, let me know what you think. Do you think it's a coincidence? Do you think it could be the same thing? I'm kind of curious about your thoughts there. Now, another person who testified for the prosecution was somebody who was friends with Rick, whose name was Sissons. Now, apparently, Rick and Sissons met in 2007, so this would have been after Lori went missing. The two worked together, they became roommates, and he said during that time, Rick had talked to him about Lori. He said that Lori was a really good friend of his who went missing that he loved very much, and he says that Rick told him that he had lived on and off with Lori. Though I did not see that confirmed. Not that I didn't see it confirmed that Sissons said this, I didn't see it confirmed that Rick and Lori lived on and off together. I didn't see anyone she knew say that that was true. Now, while on the stand, Sissons said that while the two were friends and living together, he had only known Rick by the name Rick. But he said one day he had been at home and a piece of mail had came that had Rick's entire name, like his full name, because it's Daryl Richard Ennis, not Rick Ennis, on the mail. And that Sissons just got a little curious about the person he was living with, so he Googled Rick's whole name. And he said that he saw something that freaked him out. Now, if you watched last week's video, you probably know what he saw. He saw information about the brutal murder of Rick Ennis' mother and stepfather that he committed when he was 12 years old. But when on the stand, when he was like, I saw something and it freaked me out, immediately that line of questioning was shut the fuck down. The judge called, the attorneys to the bench, they had a conversation, and when the line of questioning resumed, Sissons did not say anything about that again. This is because Rick was a minor at the time those murders were committed, so his case was sealed, which means it's sealed to the public and wasn't privy information. The jury at the trial wasn't privy to the information that Rick had previously murdered two people. And while we're on the subject of his record, apparently, after he was arrested for Lori's murder, other court documents were released. People were sleuthing. They were looking into him. And they found that there were court records that in 2003, Rick had been arrested for kidnapping, rape, and sodomy of another young woman. Okay? But this case had gone to like a grand jury, and they had decided not to press charges because they didn't feel like there was enough evidence to get a conviction. Which, he is innocent of that because he didn't go to trial, but it's very interesting considering the things we know about this person. That's all I will say. But back to the trial he's at now, where he actually is going to trial for what he did. The trial resumed, and Sissons said that after seeing the super secret thing about Rick, when he Googled him, he called Rick and he told him, like, hey, I'm gonna need you to fucking move out. And that Rick was very surprised. I'm like, what the fuck? Why? Why do I gotta go? What did I do? That night, Sissons decided to stay with his girlfriend so that he could give Rick an opportunity to get his stuff and get out of the apartment without any sort of altercation happening, because he wasn't interested in that. And the next day, he actually called the cops to ask them to escort him to his apartment to make sure Rick was gone, because he was scared of Rick now after what he saw. And he said when he got there, luckily Rick was gone, but his apartment was trashed. He said things were thrown around, things were broken, the stove was on, and there were remnants of something that had been burnt. Now, all of this seems random, but it does matter, I promise. And it's because during this whole thing, the trashing of his apartment, kicking, Rick out and all that, he found something. He found some evidence that ended up being used at trial. And it's because there were some of Rick's items that were nicely packaged, put in a bag, left by the door. It definitely looked like this was something he planned to take with him, but somehow just forgot. And what was in this bag, or what were in these, there were 3 rugs. Okay, there were 3 rugs inside this bag that looked like Rick was planning to take them with him, and Sissons had held on to these rugs. So, when Rick got arrested and was being charged with murder and Sissons found out, he reached out to local authorities, who then got him in contact with the Auburn Police Department, and he gave them these rugs. And these rugs ended up being identified as the rugs that were taken from Lori's mobile home when she went missing. You remember the rugs that Peanut would hop on from rug to rug because he didn't like tile? Rick had them. And Sissons even told police that because him and Rick had been friends, they had talked about the rugs at some point, and Rick had mentioned to him that at least one of these rugs was a gift from his missing friend, Lori. So he had these rugs. They tested these rugs, and they did find that Rick Ennis's blood was on at least one of these rugs, which I will say, they make it like a big thing at trial that, oh, his blood was on one of the rugs, but I'm kind of like, he was using these rugs as like his rugs in his home after she went missing, so his blood being on them does make sense to me, but these rugs being identified by Lori's family and friends as her rugs that were taken when she went missing makes a lot less sense to me. Oh, and on top of that, because Sissons had one more piece of information that was just, verbal. He didn't have anything physical to prove it, but this is something he said. He said that when Rick and he were just friends before they moved in together, he had been at Rick's previous place where he had lived, and in his room, he saw a glass Galileo thermometer, just like the one that Lori's mom had gotten for her, and that was missing when Lori went missing. But he said that once he and Rick moved in together, he didn't see that thermometer again. Now, we're moving on to the testimony of Terry. And Terry is a friend, or an old friend, somebody who definitely is no longer friends with Rick, but in 2008 they were. So Terry and Rick had been co-workers. They worked together at Sam's Club in South Carolina, and on the day that we're going to talk about right now, he and Rick had gone to a sports bar called Wild Wings Cafe. The two were just hanging out, having a couple drinks, chatting away like buds do, when he asked Rick, so what brings you to South Carolina? Why did you leave Auburn? Because remember, Rick left Auburn pretty quickly after Lori disappeared, telling investigators that things, were just too uncomfortable for him. But he tells Terry something totally different, and he tells Terry something that is very telling. Terry said of this quote, he said he had gotten into some trouble and had to get out of town. And he also said that he had to take care of some business that he had to, quote, strangle a bitch. Terry added, quote, he said that they were acquaintances and that he had had a relationship with her, but she didn't want to have anything to do with him, and he was a little upset about that. And Terry said that Rick said that the girl he had to do this to was, quote, a white piece of trailer park trash. Now, he says at the time when Rick said this, he didn't believe him. He thought he was joking, gassing himself up, which, what a joke, I guess. Haha, so funny. But he didn't think much of it. He didn't think it was serious. Until years later, Rick gets arrested. Articles are written about it. A mutual friend of Rick's and Terry's sends Terry an article about Rick's arrest. It's like, oh, did you see this? What do you think about this? Terry sees it. He reads what he's arrested for, and he's like, oh shit, maybe that wasn't a joke. And he contacts the Auburn Police Department to tell them what he knows. Now, I will just mention this because it happened, though I don't think it's particularly relevant, but it is worth mentioning because it did happen. During cross-examination, Terry did admit that he had been convicted of a fraud case in his life, and I don't really know what the defense was trying to do. I believe they were probably just trying to say that, Terry wasn't a trustworthy person because he'd been to jail before, but it didn't feel totally related because I don't think Terry got anything for his testimony, but this did happen. And speaking of the defense was basically saying that the police had fucked up this case, that they had bungled evidence, and even said that the police had planted evidence in order to get a conviction against Rick Ennis for the murder of Lori Slesinski. The defense said that they believe that the cigarette with Rick's DNA was planted as evidence to frame him, pointing out that everything at the crime scene was super soaked with water due to firefighters putting out the fire, but the hand-rolled cigarette was only partially wet, and they also noted that there was no chain of custody that proved the cigarette was even found at the scene. It was just found years later in an evidence bag in the file with no explanation as to how it actually got there, which is a problem. Right, you do need to have a chain of custody. That's what proves that something wasn't planted, and the defense is saying that wasn't there. He then said that the police got tunnel vision on Rick right from the start and wanted to convict him on pure speculation, and said specifically of this quote, the 18-month investigation was not an investigation or a re-investigation of Lori. It was an investigation on Rick. Now, the defense did something that was sort of unusual in the type of case that we're talking about today, and that's that they actually put Rick on the stand to testify in his own behalf. He was going to be there to sort of explain the evidence that police had found and to discredit the testimony of the witnesses who had placed other evidence, in his hands, and the confession and shit like that. Rick maintained his innocence, saying that he and Lori were friends. They were good friends. They were friends with benefits, in fact, and said that he and Lori had spent time together the day that she went missing, but then she left to go and sell some weed that the two had been growing together to a dealer. He was still sticking with this story, which felt very much like he was trying to imply that a random drug dealer had murdered Lori, but if you recall, Lori's dog was cared for all those days that she had been missing, and what random drug dealer who didn't know her and didn't know Peanut, why would they bother? Now, the friends with benefits thing, that's a really convenient way to explain the semen on her bed sheets now that you know that it's been found there, right? He said about their relationship, that the two started having a physical relationship about 2 months before she went missing, and the last time they had been physical together was a week before she went missing. But her friends, her family were like, actually, no, that's bullshit, which nobody knows anyone's personal life, but it seems pretty clear that wasn't true, especially since she was so annoyed that he had expressed his feelings for her. Why would she do that? I mean, I guess you could make the argument that it's possible, but the people who knew her said it was bullshit. And as far as the drugs thing, this is his, his explanation as to what may have happened to Lori and how it wasn't him. Police looked into it and they have found no evidence that she was growing and selling drugs. And they talked to friends and family and said that maybe in her life she had grown 1 or 2 plants for personal use, but that she had never been a drug dealer. He was asked about his deep feelings for Lori and the love letter he wrote to her before she disappeared, and he said that yes, he liked her. He had wrote her that letter asking to be together, and that the two had talked, and she said that she didn't have feelings for him, or didn't have feelings like that, and just wanted to be friends. And when discussing the letter, he was asked, if the letter was just asking her out, why did it upset her so much? Because she was reportedly pretty irritated by it. He said he didn't really understand why people were saying that she was so upset, because she wasn't mad. She wasn't happy about it, but she wasn't mad. He says that she asked him why are you asking now? Why did you wait so long to ask this? Because at this point, we've been friends so long, I want to just keep it as friends. So that was his explanation for all that. He maintained that he did not kill her, and when it came to the scratches on his arms, he said that, those had come from his dog. Though at the time when he was asked, when they were fresh, when this had just happened, he said he had no idea how they got there. But now he's saying, you know what? Those are from my bulldog. Which, man, that bulldog sure played a big part in what was going on with Rick Ennis. Because you remember from episode 1, there was a scrub brush found in his car. Well, there was blood found on that. And he's like, I use that on my dog too, actually. Because she gets dog periods and I have to clean blood out of my car all the time. Every day. Every month. Even though I believe dogs don't have periods every month like people do, but that's what he said. He also said that he didn't have a key to the bowling alley and had quit the bowling alley weeks before Lori went missing, so he couldn't have taken the gas can. He said that he never trashed Sisson's apartment. Doesn't know why he said that. And that the rugs that were found in Sisson's apartment weren't Lori's, that he had bought them at Target, and he said he never told Terry that he had strangled anyone. So he's explaining everything away that he can, or at least trying to. But the one thing he couldn't explain away was his DNA, his blood being found in Lori's trailer. And the prosecution said to him of this quote, "The blood in Lori's trailer has your DNA in it. How did it get there?" And he responded, quote, "I have no idea." The defense closed by saying that this was simply a circumstantial case, which is true, right? But all of the evidence does paint a picture of what happened. That's what a circumstantial case does, and it seems pretty clear what the picture is that it's painting. She was gone, right? And there were signs of a struggle. Though the defense does say that you can't prove that those signs of a struggle, that the scuff marks happened at this time when she went missing. They could have been there a long time. And the gold hoop, the gold earring that was found that had the hair in it, the DNA couldn't be linked to Rick. But all the evidence they did have did link to Rick. He tried to discredit all of it, as I said, and anything that he could not discredit, his attorney tried to say was planted. This is the type of case, a circumstantial case, that you really have to look at and see if it makes sense. And the defense was saying that it didn't, that the case that the prosecution was laying out the motivation, what's the word I'm looking for? The motive. motive. The motive just didn't make sense. He asked the jury, is it reasonable for a person to murder another person because they just want to be friends? Is it reasonable based on the evidence? Is it reasonable based on your own personal life experiences? And the prosecution said, listen, this wasn't little love. This wasn't puppy love. This wasn't something that Rick was going to get over easily. He was obsessed. He constantly talked about how in love he was with Lori. He told everyone who would listen, anyone who would listen, how much he loved her, even people he wasn't close with. He wrote her a letter expressing this love. He came into her home when she wasn't there, and he left it for her. Which just shows that he has no boundaries. He doesn't respect boundaries. They also said that the idea that the two were friends with benefits was ludicrous, made up, and said specifically of this quote, it's very easy to say you had consensual sex with a woman you know is dead. After 10 days of trial, it was up to the jury to decide if Rick Ennis was guilty of the murder of Lori Slesinski. And after determining this, if he was found guilty, it was up to them to determine if he was going to spend life in prison without parole or be killed by lethal injection. In April of 2022, on their second day of deliberation, they had come back with their decision. They had found Rick Ennis guilty on 2 counts of capital murder, including capital murder burglary and capital murder kidnapping, both charges bringing with it the death penalty, and they did all of this, they came to this decision, all without a body. Which, man, is always wild to see. But as the prosecutor said on this case, quote, I think we can all agree there should be no reward for someone who's good at dumping a body. You should not get a prize for body disposal. You should be held accountable for their murder, even though you are really good at dumping it. Lori's mother was so happy and relieved to finally be able to put this part of the story behind her. And she said after the verdict was read, quote, I believe Lori and all her family in heaven are celebrating today. And she was referring to her father, Casey, her brother, Paul, and Peanut. And she said that her reuniting with Lori in heaven is going to be a joyous day. After the verdict was read, a new trial date was set so that they could, have his sentencing. It was going to be happening on a different day where they were going to determine if he was going to be sent to life in prison or given the death penalty. But this didn't end up happening because the DA told the judge during this day, when the verdict was read, that Arlene, Lori's mother, did not want to pursue the death penalty. I guess initially she wasn't sure, but after sitting down with the DA and talking about what going for the death penalty really meant, she decided that it would be best to just not go after it because she didn't want to deal with all of the lengthy appeals that come with giving somebody the death penalty. And Arlene said of this decision, quote, it's been a difficult road. I won't lie to y'all, but God has given me the strength to persevere. As long as he's locked away for life, that's all that matters to me. She said, as long as he's given life in prison with no possibility of parole, I'm fine, but I don't want to be drugged through this for the rest of my life. With that, on April 14th, 2022, Judge Walker sentenced Rick Ennis to life in prison with no possibility of parole. After the sentencing, Lori's family left the courtroom hugging and crying like those who loved her were so happy, and those who were there for Rick were kind of in shock. They really did not believe that he was going to be found guilty. His fiance was there, and apparently she just collapsed into somebody who was next to her crying and sobbing. She was so surprised this happened. She was so certain that he was going to be exonerated that she had made plans for after the hearing to go and celebrate. Now, Rick Ennis did say that he plans to appeal, but as of now, I haven't seen anything that shows that he has done that. But it is also relatively new, so that could be in the works. Now, the law enforcement officials who worked this case are so proud of their work. Whitaker, Arlene's hero, as she calls him, said that this was the best day of his career. And the prosecutor said that it's bittersweet because they got him behind bars, but she wasn't able to bring Lori's body home for Arlene, and she wishes that she could have, but Rick's appeal makes it seem like he's not going to reveal the location of her body, which is such a shame because I just don't see how a person could do that. How somebody could let this woman, let Arlene's mother, her friends, her family, let them suffer like that. But, Rick's not a normal person. One of the special agents who helped crack this case, well, according to Dwight, you don't crack a case, you solve a case. But this was Whitaker, said of Rick Ennis, quote, I've seen a lot of bad people in my career who have done a lot of bad things, but he is one of the most evil people I've ever seen in my life. And man, he'd have to be evil to do what they believe he did to her, because they believe he went to her trailer, He attacked her, he assaulted her, and then with that phone cord, he either tied her up or strangled her with it. But either way, he killed her. After the sentencing, Arlene went back to her home and she spent some time in Lori's trailer, which she keeps on her property. And she said that she had a conversation with Lori where she just told her, like, we finally did it. We finally got you justice. She said that she goes to that trailer from time to time to think about things, to think about Lori, to connect with her, and to think about happier times. Though it's also hard because she thinks about the horrible things that likely happened to her daughter in that trailer. She thinks about how at this point of her life she could have been, done with work. She could have retired. She could have been spending time with her daughter and her grandkids, but that's all gone. Now, remember how I said that it wasn't really public knowledge at the time of his trial that Rick had killed his parents, that wasn't privy to the jury? Well, after he was convicted of Lori's murder, it all came out. Like three stepsisters who, incidentally, he had written that he wanted to murder on his to-do list, they came out and gave a statement saying exactly what he did. They said that many people believe that kids don't commit these types of horrible crimes, implying that people don't think these kids should serve long sentences, but that's not true. And they said specifically of their father, who was murdered at Rick's hands, quote, "We have missed our daddy for 29 long years. He hasn't been there for graduations, marriages, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren being born, and the joy of watching them grow, loving them, and spoiling them. Fishing trips, holidays, family gatherings, and the list could go on." They added that Rick Ennis was finally being held accountable, was finally being put in jail for a prolonged period of time, and said that their family can finally breathe a sigh of relief knowing that some sort of justice is being served. Because remember, he served less than a decade for brutally murdering two people, was released, and then went on to murder somebody else. Which, that whole thing, man, him being so young, murdering his parents, being reformed, being released, and then murdering again, man, it gives me such Edmund Kemper vibes, which I'm sure we all know who that is, but he was a serial killer, and he's actually one of the few serial killers that I want to cover on my channel, that I've wanted to cover for a long time, and I just haven't done it yet. Maybe I will one day. Let me know if you guys are interested in that, but it reminds me of that so much. It's just one of those situations that seems to be avoidable, right? Because he clearly had something in him. And his stepsisters say that they sort of blamed the state for Lori's death and said specifically of this, quote, "The violence that happens in the state and across the nation has no age limit. The courts shouldn't be bound by a state law that says children less than 14 can't be tried as adults. This case is living proof. If Ennis would have received punishment he deserved when he murdered two people at 12 years old, Lori Ann wouldn't have lost her life at the hands of this evil person. The state of Alabama must change their laws." They said they don't think it should be age specific, but instead be based on the totality of the circumstances because, all children mature differently, have different life experiences, levels of education, and that it should be based on like a case by case basis. But I don't know, man, because with things, I don't know what I think, because with things like Miller versus Alabama, for example, I think that youthful offenders are going to be getting more protections, not less. But let me know what you guys think of all that. Do you think that it should be that a young child should be tried as an adult? I think probably that what it should be a case-by-case basis, but maybe don't try children as adults. Maybe just have harsher punishments that can be given to children, but still considerations for kids, because we do know so much more about how the brain develops now. It is a big time gray area. But that's how his family feels. That's how his murder victim's family feels, and they just say that they pray for Lori's family every day. Many people pray and care for Lori's family, including the investigators that helped solve Lori's murder and the prosecution that was able to put him away without a body. She really hopes that one day Lori's body will be found so that Arlene can give her daughter a proper burial. But when the prosecutor, was asked if she thinks Rick Ennis will ever admit where the body is, she said she couldn't really speak for him, but she believes that based on his personality, he's not the type of person who will ever talk. But she did say, quote, "Lori is in heaven, and I know that, and that's all that matters to me." And with that, my friends, is the story of the horrible murder of Lori Slesinski. I hope you found my telling of this two parts to be informative. I hope it made sense. And of course, I just want to thank you for remembering Lori with me today. Now, considering everything I told you throughout this video, I want to revisit the question of the day. I had a couple. These are those questions. What do you believe happened to Lori that day? Like, what do you think he did to her? Do you think he's responsible? I mean, I think he has to be. I guess it's possible that framings happen. It seems unlikely to me that police got tunnel vision and went after him when he wasn't responsible, because, man, would he have to be the unluckiest guy in the world if he didn't do this? Like, Scott Peterson level of unlucky. And I'm not saying I don't think Scott Peterson did it, but I've always said that, like, if he didn't, he's the most unlucky guy in the world. And the same would go for Rick Ennis in this case. But let me know all your thoughts in the comments below, because I'm just kind of curious. I feel like this is the type of case that could bring on a lot of opinions. Anyways, guys, before you leave, don't forget to leave me a comment down below with what kind of case, or what case rather, you'd like to see me cover in the future. As you know, I have a long list of cases, and whenever you leave a suggestion, I put it on my list with your name next to it, so if I cover it, I can give it a shout out. I love looking into the cases you guys suggest, because they're often cases I haven't heard of, or cases that need more coverage, and I know you're filled with great ideas and great taste. Otherwise, you would not be here. If you haven't already, please don't forget to join the Brat Pack by subscribing and ringing the bell. I put out a new video every single week, sometimes 2 a week, and I would love to hang out with you. Yes, you specifically you, but I can only do that if you join the Brat Pack. And one of us. And if you want to hang out more consistently, all my social media is listed down below, along with a link to my membership and a link to my merch store. And now, with all of that said, I just want to thank you for being here when you could literally be anywhere else in the world. That is tight. You are tight. Please stay safe and be a better person than you were yesterday, and I hope to see you in my next video.